My daughter called me on my birthday and said, "I wish this will be your last celebration. You are such a nuisance." Then I also replied, "This will be your last laughter." The next hour, I made a call, and the $7 billion contract her company got was immediately terminated. What happened next will shock you. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Joshua Ray from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. People look at men like me and think we're untouchable. They see the suits, the boardrooms, the endless digits in the bank, and assume life gave us a golden path. But no one sees the sacrifices. What we gave up just to build something worth passing on. I spent my youth chasing contracts, building networks from the ground up, negotiating in hotel lobbies and smoke-filled backrooms before tech made things efficient. My name meant something. Still does. But titles don't mean much when your own child sees you as a burden. My name is Raymond. I'm 71, semi-retired, and I own stakes in industries I no longer bother tracking. My legacy should have been my daughter, Leona. That's what I thought. Raised her in mansions, gave her private schools, mentorship, everything she ever wanted, except, maybe, the thing she never asked for, time. I was always working. And when I wasn't, I was tired. I thought she understood I did it for her. Maybe she didn't. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. My birthday came quietly this year. I don't throw parties anymore. Just a few catered trays in the dining room, a bottle of scotch I save for occasions, and a half-read book in my lap. My assistant, Marcus, came by with a bottle of wine and some half-baked muffins his wife made. We laughed for a bit. My lawyer sent me a signed baseball, random, but thoughtful. But from Leona? Nothing. Not even a text by noon. I pretended not to care. Pretended not to glance at my phone every few minutes like some lovesick teenager. When she finally called around 4 p.m., I smiled. Relief sweeping over me like I'd just been pulled from a riptide. I even cleared my throat to sound more alive. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, hoping I didn't sound too eager. That's when she dropped it, cold, sharp, unflinching. "I wish this will be your last celebration. You are such a nuisance." At first, I thought I misheard. Maybe she said nuisance as a joke. Maybe there was context I missed. I repeated it back like a fool. "What did you say?" I asked, still half smiling like some desperate clown. But she didn't repeat it. She didn't laugh. She just exhaled and said, "I've got meetings. Just wanted to be polite and call. Happy whatever." Then the line went silent. Not even a click. I stared at the phone, the screen still lit, and felt something old and fragile inside me snap. Like a rusted screw finally giving out. For all the anger I could have felt, what came first was shame. Embarrassment, even. That I had raised a daughter who could say something like that with no tremor in her voice. I sat there, jaw clenched, the words bouncing in my skull like a ricochet. Nuisance. Last celebration. I looked around the room. The tall ceilings. The oil paintings I'd collected over the years. The hum of central air. All of it suddenly felt hollow. Leona had always been bold. Too bold. But she was never cruel. Not like this. Not until she became CEO of her own company. Started brushing shoulders with politicians and venture capitalists, speaking on panels, collecting magazine covers. She thought she didn't need me anymore. Maybe she didn't. But I wasn't going to let her spit on the man who handed her the very tools she used to cut me off. I picked up my phone again, but this time, I didn't call her back. I scrolled down to a contact saved under the name Mendoza, one of those old names that opened doors with just a whisper. He owed me a favor. A big one. And I knew exactly how I wanted to cash it in. "Mendoza," I said when he answered. "Remember that contract I pushed through for LNA Tech Group?" There was a pause, then a slow, curious chuckle. "Your daughter's firm, right?" I didn't smile. "Kill it." He didn't ask why. That's the kind of relationships I keep. One's built on loyalty and silence. "Consider it done," he replied. By the time I hung up, the pit in my stomach had turned into something steadier. A cold calm. Not revenge. Not really. Just balance. If my love meant so little to her, then my support should mean even less. The room was still. Too still. I picked up the scotch, poured a glass, and took a long, bitter sip. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip below the skyline, casting long shadows across the floor. I thought about birthdays past, her giggling as a child, frosting smeared on her chin, the way she used to squeeze my hand like I was her whole world. Somewhere along the way, that little girl disappeared, replaced by a woman who saw me as disposable. And yet, even then, even with the weight of her words crushing me, I didn't regret what I'd done. She needed to learn. You don't bite the hand that built the empire beneath your feet. And so, as I sat there alone, glass in hand, I whispered back into the silence, "Then this will be your last laughter." By morning, the news had already begun to circulate. Quietly, of course, no headlines, no exposés, just whispers in the corridors of power, the kind of whispers that move faster than facts. I didn't need confirmation. I knew Mendoza would make it clean. Leona's company had secured a $7 billion government-backed infrastructure deal overseas, ambitious, bloated, and delicate. It required a precise alignment of political trust and legal leniency to stay afloat. What she didn't know was that 2 of those key foreign ministries were still in my pocket, holdovers from a decade ago when I brokered oil import contracts that kept their countries lit. One call was all it took. They pulled their support, citing internal concerns. Just like that, the scaffolding collapsed. She'd never see it coming. Around 10:43 a.m., my phone rang. I saw her name flash across the screen. I let it ring until the final vibration. Then again, 2 minutes later. On the third try, I answered, but I said nothing. Just silence. I wanted her to start. "Dad." Her voice was already tight, frantic beneath the thin layer of control she always wore like armor. "What the hell is happening?" "They're pulling out of the deal. My CFO just called me in tears. Did you hear anything?" I didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing, shallow, rapid. She wasn't used to not having the upper hand. Finally, I spoke, calm and deliberate. I said. "I also heard you wished me dead yesterday." There was a pause. A beat so long it hung heavy between us like smoke. Then she snapped. "Oh, come on. You know I didn't mean that." I was stressed. "You're always playing the victim." I cut her off. "No, Leona. What you meant was clear. And stress doesn't excuse cruelty. I've made excuses for you your entire life. I'm done." She fell silent again. When she spoke, her voice had dropped, bitter now. "So this is payback? You destroy my career because I said something out of line." I laughed once. Dry? Empty. "You think I destroyed your career?" "No, Leona. I simply removed my hand from the scale. The rest collapsed on its own. Maybe it was never as solid as you thought." She gasped like I'd slapped her. "You think you're a god, don't you? Still trying to control everything. This is why I said what I said. You suffocate people with your power." I let that sink in. Then I answered with what I'd decided the night before. "Only those who love me deserve my support." She hung up. It wasn't a click. It was a crash, the kind that makes your ear ring afterward. I lowered the phone and stared at it for a moment, unsure whether to feel vindicated or hollow. Truth was, I felt both. There's no triumph in cutting off your child, even when they give you every reason to. There's just clarity, a brutal sort of peace. Later that afternoon, I met with Marcus in my study. He brought papers for me to review, some legacy investments needing my signature. "You look lighter," he said casually, handing me a folder. I raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" He nodded. "I know what happened. I saw the alert on the finance wire. That deal was monumental. You must have really been hurt." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the window, looked out at the long, manicured lawn I used to watch Leona run across with pigtails bouncing behind her. "She spat in my face on the one day I still pretend to matter," I said. And I let her. Marcus exhaled. "Sometimes, you've got to let people fall just to see if they ever knew who held them up." He wasn't usually so poetic, but the word stuck. I turned to him and asked, "Was I too harsh?" He didn't hesitate. "No, sir. You were overdue." It's strange, the things you remember in moments like that. I thought about the time Leona was 16 and crashed my Mercedes into a fence. I didn't yell. I told the staff to cover it up and bought her another the next day. Or when she dropped out of her Stanford internship after 3 days because her supervisor talked too much, and I wrote a check to the dean to keep it off her record. I protected her from consequences her entire life. Maybe that's why she thought she could speak to me like I was some old relic. Disposable. An outdated app she could delete when it got inconvenient. The phone stayed quiet the rest of the day. No apologies. No follow-up. Just silence. Which, in many ways, was louder than anything she could have said. I imagined her sitting in her corner office, staff buzzing around her like bees in a hive gone mad. Maybe she'd scream at someone. Maybe she'd blame her PR team, her legal counsel, anyone but herself. But deep down, I knew. She'd recognize the signature of my silence. That was our unspoken language. She wielded words like weapons, but I wielded consequence. That night, I ate dinner alone in the formal dining room. Steak, medium rare. Broccoli steamed and buttered. A modest glass of red. I didn't light candles or play jazz in the background. I didn't need ambience. I needed closure. Every bite tasted sharper than it should have. Like my taste buds were on high alert, sensing something final had happened. I glanced once at the empty chair beside me, the seat she used to sit in when she'd quiz me about the stock market, long before she knew how to manipulate it. That version of her was gone. And maybe, just maybe, so was the version of me that kept hoping she'd come back. I rose from the table, placed my napkin neatly on the plate, and stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet. No celebration, no laughter, just the dull hum of consequences settling into place. 2 days passed without another word from her. I expected the silence to last longer, but I knew my daughter well enough to anticipate the explosion. Leona was many things, driven, brilliant, strategic, but patience had never been her virtue. By the 3rd day it came. Not a call, not a text, but a knock. I followed her into the house, watching as her heels clacked against the marble floors, echoing in the quiet like gunshots. "You really think you won?" she said, spinning around in the foyer with venom in her voice. "You think ruining me makes you the better parent?" I raised a brow, unbothered. I wasn't playing defense. "No," I replied calmly. "But it reminded you who held the power to begin with." Her face twisted, eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "You're pathetic," she snapped. A bitter old man who couldn't handle being irrelevant. I took a few steps toward her, not out of intimidation, but to close the emotional distance that had festered for years. "You know what's pathetic?" I said, voice low. "Calling your father on his birthday just to wish him death. After everything I gave you. After all the doors I opened." Her lip trembled slightly, almost imperceptible, but she masked it with rage. "You think money makes you a father? You think deals and contracts make up for the fact you were never there?" Her words stung, not because they were true, but because she believed them. I had been there, in the only way I knew how. I built an empire to shield her from struggle. I sacrificed time so she could have options. And yet here she stood, casting me as the villain in a life I'd built for her brick by brick. "You're right," I said, nodding. "I wasn't there every recital. I missed some birthdays. But do you know what I never missed? A bill, a call from your school, a single opportunity to give you more than I had. You confuse presence with love, Leona. But love doesn't always look like hand-holding. Sometimes, it looks like working 3 nights straight so you never have to." She looked away then, blinking fast, jaw clenched. Her silence told me I'd struck something real. But pride wouldn't let her bend. "So what now?" she spat. "You cut me off forever? You sit in this mausoleum of a house and pat yourself on the back for teaching me a lesson." I walked past her into the living room, gesturing for her to follow. She hesitated, then complied. I sat in my leather armchair, the one she used to crawl into as a child when storms scared her. She stood, arms crossed, a fortress of resentment. "No," I said, "not forever. But things will never go back to how they were. You burned that bridge when you weaponized my age against me." Her nostrils flared. It was one damn sentence. It was the truth behind the sentence. I cut in. That's what matters. Words don't lie. They reveal. For the first time, I saw her falter. Not crumble, not soften, but shift, like something cracked beneath the surface. She dropped her arms, sank onto the couch across from me, and stared at the floor. I was angry, she said, voice lower now. I felt like I owed you everything, and I hated it. I wanted one win that was mine. I listened, carefully, measuring the space between admission and apology. You had wins, I said. Plenty of them. But you never once looked back to say thank you. That's all I ever wanted. Not praise. Just acknowledgement. She nodded slowly, fingers fidgeting with the hem of her coat. So what now? She asked again, this time quieter. There was no fire in her tone, just exhaustion. And behind it, something like regret. I stood, walked to the fireplace mantel, and picked up an old photo. Her 6th birthday, frosting on her cheeks, her arms wrapped tightly around my neck. I handed it to her. Now, I said, you remember where you came from. And I remember who you've become. We start there. No promises. Just honesty. She took the photo and stared at it, eyes glossing just slightly. But I didn't press. I didn't comfort her. Some wounds don't need bandages. They need air. We sat in silence after that. A long, heavy silence that wasn't comfortable but wasn't hostile either. Eventually, she stood, placed the photo gently on the side table, and nodded once. I'll call when I'm ready, she said. I nodded back. Take your time. She left without another word. No hug. No apology. But something had shifted. Not forgiveness. Not healing. Just space. And sometimes, space is the first mercy you give the people who've hurt you. The press got wind of it faster than I expected. Not the full story. No, they'd never uncover that part. But the symptoms were everywhere. Industry insiders speculated that Leona's deal had crumbled due to compliance irregularities and sudden government withdrawal. One blog even hinted at sabotage, though it danced carefully around the details, probably afraid of getting sued. LNA Tech's stock dropped 17 points in a day. Her board scrambled for answers. Analysts called it a mysterious unraveling of the year's most promising international venture. And through it all, I watched in silence. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just read the headlines like a man watching a distant building burn, one he helped design but no longer wished to live in. A few days later, the whispers reached the family. Not the real story, of course, but enough for the leeches to start circling. My younger sister, Elaine, called me out of the blue. First time in over a year. Ray, she said in that falsely sweet tone she always used when she wanted something. I heard about Leona's deal falling apart. Everyone's talking. Is she okay? I could hear the nosiness leaking through her concern. She didn't care if Leona was okay. She just wanted the inside scoop to feed her book club gossip circuit. I gave her nothing. She'll manage, I said flatly. She always does. Elaine sighed, clearly annoyed that I wouldn't play along. Well, you know how people are. They're saying someone powerful pulled strings. I let that hang in the air. And do you believe them? I asked. She hesitated. I don't know what to believe anymore, Ray. You've always been capable. That word. Capable. A compliment laced with accusation. I ended the call with a curt goodbye. I didn't know her, or anyone else, an explanation. What happened between Leona and me was between a father and his daughter, not a family reunion topic. But not everyone stayed neutral. Marcus, ever loyal, came by with updates. He'd been monitoring the fallout from the sidelines, watching investor chatter, media threads, even internal leaks. She's bleeding, he said one morning, sitting across from me in the study. Financially, emotionally, that contract was her golden goose. Now she's in scramble mode. I nodded slowly. She'll recover, I said. She's too stubborn not to. He tilted his head. Do you want her to? That question landed heavier than expected. Did I? Did I want her to rise again humbled? Or did I want her to stay grounded, reminded of the weight of her actions? I didn't answer. Not right away. I just sipped my coffee and stared at the flames flickering in the fireplace. I want her to learn, I finally said. Whatever comes after that is up to her. It wasn't just Leona who felt the quake. My name started surfacing in conversations that had once grown cold. Old acquaintances, former colleagues, even a journalist or two reached out. Some probing, others just looking to reconnect. I ignored most of them. But one surprised me. David Lee, my former business partner and godfather to Leona. We hadn't spoken since he retired to Florida 6 years ago. Ray, he said, Voice gravelly from age and cigars. You and I both know the game. But this feels personal. I didn't deny it. It was, I said simply. Family, he asked. I nodded. She forgot where she came from. He let out a low whistle. And you reminded her? I chuckled. In a language she understands. David didn't judge me. He knew me too well. But he did leave me with one parting thought. Just be sure the lesson doesn't turn into a grudge, Ray. Sometimes the fire we use to teach ends up burning what little bridge we have left. I thought about that for days. Not because I regretted anything, but because I knew the line between righteous and ruthless could blur if you weren't careful. Had I crossed it? Or had I simply enforced a boundary that should have existed long ago? The world always told men like me that we had to choose between success and softness. I chose success. But what they don't tell you is that once you choose that path, softness becomes dangerous, because the moment you show it, people mistake it for weakness. Leona had mistaken my age, my quiet, my hands-off parenting for irrelevance. She needed correction, not cruelty. Correction. And correction, when delivered without malice, is a form of love. Still, I wasn't made of stone. One night, I found myself on her company's website, staring at her bio. They had already taken down the press release about the contract. Scrubbed it clean, like it never existed. Her picture stared back at me, confident, elegant, unreadable. I wondered if she still had the photo I'd handed her. If she ever looked at it. If she hated me. If she was afraid of becoming me. Or worse, if she already had and just didn't see it yet. 2 days later, my housekeeper brought me an envelope. No postage. Hand-delivered. Inside was a single card. No fancy design. Just plain ivory cardstock with 4 words scrawled in Leona's handwriting. I'm still thinking. L. That was it. No apology. No explanation. But also no hatred. Just thought. And in that moment, it was enough. Because sometimes, thinking is the first crack in pride. And cracks let the light in. She didn't call ahead. She didn't text. She just showed up again, this time without the sunglasses or the theatrics. No clacking heels, no windstorm of accusations. Just Leona, standing at the front door in a gray wool coat, holding a paper bag from the bakery down the street, the same one we used to go to when she was a little girl. For a moment, I considered not opening the door, not out of spite, but because I didn't know which version of her I was about to meet, the fury or the facade. But something in her eyes, something in the slump of her shoulders, made me turn the handle. Good morning, she said. Her voice was lower, slower, like she hadn't been sleeping much. I brought pastries. I stepped aside wordlessly, and she walked in like she used to, like this place was still part of her. She made her way to the kitchen, unpacked the bag, and began arranging things on the counter. Croissants, 2 blueberry muffins, a small container of butter. I watched her quietly, waiting for the performance to end, for the sting to land. But she just kept arranging the pastries, her movements mechanical, focused. I figured we could sit, she finally said. Talk, like we haven't in years. We sat in the breakfast nook, opposite ends of the small table, the kind of space that forced proximity. For a while, we ate in silence. She tore a croissant into neat, nervous pieces. I sipped coffee. The house felt unnaturally still, like it was holding its breath. Then she said it. I didn't know how to say sorry. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she cleared her throat quickly to cover it. That's not something I'm good at. But I've been thinking. About everything. About what I said to you. And what it meant. I didn't jump in. I let her speak. Sometimes, letting someone unravel on their own is the kindest thing you can do. I was angry, she continued. Angry at you, at myself, at how I felt so owned by everything you gave me. I worked hard, Dad. I did. But every time I accomplished something, there was this voice in my head. Would I even be here if he hadn't made the calls? If he hadn't signed the checks? It made me resentful. Ungrateful, maybe. But mostly trapped. I set my coffee down gently, clasped my hands, and leaned forward. You weren't trapped, Leona. You were privileged. There's a difference. She nodded. I know that now. I do. But when you're in it, when everyone around you keeps reminding you who your father is, it starts to feel like no achievement is really yours. Like you're just acting out a part in someone else's legacy. I exhaled, the weight in my chest shifting slightly. And so, you punished me for giving you everything I never had. She flinched. I didn't mean to. I swear I didn't. I thought maybe if I cut you off emotionally, I could stand on my own. But then you took your support, and suddenly, I saw how much I had relied on it. How much I relied on you. Her voice was trembling now. Not dramatically, not performatively, just enough to let me see the fracture lines beneath the polished surface. I studied her for a long moment. My daughter, my heir, my failure, and my greatest pride, tangled into one. So, I said, what do you want now? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. A photo. The same one I'd given her. The two of us, cake on her nose, her arms locked around my neck. I kept this on my desk, she said softly. All week. Every meeting. Every phone call. I kept looking at it, trying to figure out when we started drifting. When I stopped seeing you as a father and started seeing you as an obstacle. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat was tight, not from emotion, but from restraint. I didn't want to comfort her, not yet. Not until I knew this wasn't just a crisis-driven confession. She met my gaze, finally, and said, I don't expect things to go back. I know I hurt you. I know I crossed a line I can't uncross. But I'd like to start showing you, not just telling you, that I still want to be part of your life. That I still care. There it was, the redemptive gesture. Not a grand apology. Not a desperate plea. Just a moment of humility. And it cracked something open in me I hadn't realized I'd locked away. I stood slowly, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a small plate. I cut one of the muffins in half and placed it in front of her. Then let's start here, I said. With breakfast. With silence. With whatever honesty we can manage. She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, like it betrayed her. But I saw it. I saw all of it. The guilt. The fear. The tentative hope. And I let it sit between us, unspoken. We didn't fix everything that morning. We didn't hug or cry or reach some dramatic resolution. But for the first time in a long time, we sat in the same room and shared something real. Sometimes, forgiveness isn't about saying, I forgive you. It's about staying. It's about returning with intention instead of excuses. And in that moment, Leona stayed. A year passed faster than I expected. Not in the rushed, blurred way time slips past when you're grieving, but in the steady, deliberate march of a man who's finally stopped trying to fix everything. I didn't throw a party this time either, didn't hang streamers or invite old associates I barely liked. There were no photographers, no staff scurrying around with checklists. Just me, a few close friends, and the same old jazz records spinning low in the background. Marcus brought another bottle of wine. My old friend David sent a card with his usual dry humor scrawled inside. Still standing? That makes two of us. But what made this year different, what made it worth remembering, was the absence of expectation. I no longer looked at the phone waiting for a specific name to light the screen. I didn't need her to call. I didn't need anyone to. But she did. It came around 2:17 in the afternoon. I was sitting by the window, watching the way the sunlight painted golden stripes across the floor. The call was short. Happy birthday, Dad, Leona said. Her voice was steady. Not warm, not cold. Just honest. I hope today brings you peace. I paused, then answered, It already has. And that was it. No digging. No apologies. No reminiscing. Just a quiet recognition between two people who had gone through the fire and come out the other side. Scarred, maybe, but still standing. She didn't come by. Didn't send a gift. And for the first time, I didn't feel slighted by that. She'd already given me what I needed. Space, humility, and the choice to rebuild on equal footing, not obligation. After the call, I returned to my chair and poured myself a small glass of whiskey. I held it up to the light, watching how it caught the glow, rich, amber, unbothered. I thought about all the birthdays before, the ones with catered halls and forced toasts, the ones where I measured my worth by the guest list. How many people showed up, how many gifts I got, how loud the room was. But this time, the silence felt earned. I had lived long enough to understand that peace doesn't always come wrapped in laughter. Sometimes, it arrives with the absence of chaos. Leona hadn't tried to reclaim the lost contract. Not once. She'd rebuilt, slowly, carefully. Smaller ventures. Less show. I'd watch from a distance, never interfering. I wanted to see who she became when the safety net was gone. And, to her credit, she didn't collapse. She struggled. God, did she struggle. But she didn't quit. And maybe, in some corner of her pride, she understood that the collapse had been necessary. That without it, she might have gone on believing that love was owed, that support was guaranteed, no matter how deep the knife she twisted. Elaine stopped calling. The family chatter died down. Without a scandal to feed on, they moved on to other stories, other lives. David came to visit once in the spring, and we sat on the back patio talking about daughters and disappointment and the dangerous belief that love makes you immune to consequence. You did right by her, he told me, even if she never says it. I didn't need the validation, but I appreciated it all the same, because it confirmed something I'd known in my gut since the beginning. Boundaries don't destroy relationships, they define them. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the trees, I took a walk around the garden. My knees ached more these days, and the cold clung to my joints like a jealous lover. But I moved slowly, savoring the quiet. I paused near the old swing set, still intact, though the chains creaked now. That swing had carried Leona through so many summers. I remembered the way she'd scream for me to push her higher, higher, until her hair whipped around like wildfire. I smiled then, not with sadness, but with something softer. Gratitude, maybe, that I had those memories, and that I'd finally stopped expecting the present to look like the past. Inside, I found a small envelope tucked beneath my study door. No stamp, no handwriting on the front, just my name. I opened it slowly, and inside was a photo, a new one. Leona, standing outside her new office. Smaller building, less glass, more brick. She was smiling, not for a camera, but for someone behind it. Probably one of her employees. She looked tired, but she looked real. On the back, 5 words were scribbled in black ink. Still learning. Still your daughter. I didn't cry. I don't do that anymore. But I held the photo in both hands for a long time, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. This wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. This wasn't some movie-ending hug or tearful monologue. But it was a step. A real one. And I respected her more for making it small. Measured. Earned. We were building something now, not from expectation or guilt, but from mutual understanding. Maybe one day we'd sit at the same table again on my birthday. Maybe we wouldn't. But either way, I was no longer waiting for her to change. I had already changed myself. As the night settled in, I poured one final drink, raised it in the quiet, and whispered to no one in particular, to the ones who stayed, and to the ones who finally learned how. If you've ever had to make peace with letting someone you love feel your absence before they could respect your presence, then you understand this story. Have you ever drawn a boundary with a family member, even when it hurt? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this one made you think twice about what love really looks like, don't forget to subscribe. Some truths are too heavy to carry alone. See you soon in the next story.